This incident took place in Dubai when I was 10. I used to go to my friend's apartment to play with him at the time of vacation. One day, as usual, I went to his room to play. After playing for a long time, I went to the bathroom. While I was washing my face off and other things suddenly started to fall down. I was surprised. I thought maybe it was because of wind, but when I checked the surroundings, I found out there wasn't any window in the bathroom. I got out and told my friend the incident. He told me that there's a ghost in his room. I freaked out. At first, I didn't believe him. However, then next his mother and father explained the paranormal activities which had taken place there since they moved into that place. His father was making a burrito in the kitchen one day, and suddenly a call came for him. He kept the burrito on the stove and attended the call. After attending the call, when he came back, he was surprised to find out that the burrito was burning down in flames from the stove. But he said he was definitely sure that he hadn't turned on the stove yet. Another day, while his mother was cooking food, suddenly she felt as if someone was choking her by holding her throat from behind, and she fled out of the kitchen with a scream. The same day, while they were sleeping at night, they heard sounds from the bathroom. And when they checked it out, they found all the things, such as bottles of toilet cleaner and other things, had been scattered inside the bathroom. And that story made me suddenly freeze. This was the exact same incident which occurred to me. They had called some group of ghost hunters and did some sort of rituals and found out that 2 people had been murdered by someone. To know if this was true, they went to the flat owner, and he said just the same thing like the ghost hunters and apologized for giving them this room. They moved out the next day after my visit to their house. Well, to this day, I still wonder what would have happened to me if I had stayed there for some more time. My name is Max. I live in the center of the city now, but a few years back I lived in an old house on a somewhat sketchy street. But that doesn't mean I was poor. The house was ugly from outside, and it was built before World War II, but clean, warm, and cozy inside, although many people died in it there. I always believed in ghosts because of all the weird incidents that happened. Like one time, at night, me and my mom were sitting in a room. It was pitch black outside the room we sat in. Suddenly, we heard someone was tripping over, falling in the kitchen. We also heard things like plates fall down and shatter. But when we walked outside, nothing was there. Everything was in its place, and we were so scared about what was going on. A few years later, I had a dream. Me and my mom were walking down a path, and suddenly we stopped, and I heard a voice saying, "Bridge." I felt something knocking on my back 3 times, and I woke up scared. Nothing was there, so I didn't think of it that much and went back to sleep. However, after that night, this dream appeared again and again. The voice said various things that I don't remember, and one time it said something about my mom's death. It always ended with something knocking on my back 3 times. It was creepy. One time, me and my mom sat in a room and talked about ghosts, and I told her about what I'd been dreaming. Mom went silent for a second, and she confided in me that once she was sitting with a friend, and he said something not too nice to her, just for fun. She got angry and screamed, "Shut up," in a male voice, and she didn't remember that. When she described the voice, it reminded me that the voice sounded just like the voice in my dreams. In 2017, she passed away because of cancer. She died in the same room, in the same house where I got those nightmares. After that, I moved out to another place a few years ago. So I don't live in that house anymore. But I still believe in ghosts, that they exist, and they are real.
It was the spring of 2017. I was flying out to Chicago for a job interview. It was around 11 p.m. and I was sitting in my gate at the San Francisco International Airport. A storm was raging outside. Rain pouring down the windows as everyone was bundled up on the seats and keeping to themselves. I was just scanning the rows of people in seats sleeping, on laptops or phones, and wearing earbuds before I noticed this one guy. He was sitting in the farthest corner of the gate by the corridor, with no one else sitting around him. He was not on his phone or wearing headphones like everyone else. He has this huge, crooked grin plastered on his face, and he's staring directly at me. He looked pretty average in terms of looks and what he was wearing, but that grin was so creepy, it was beginning to make me shit bricks. Naturally, I turned away and pretended I hadn't seen him, but the fact that he was staring at me made me continuously turn to eye him back without realizing. Eventually, they called our gate and I boarded the plane. I took my seat in the business class right by the window and went on my phone, checking Instagram and texting friends. I did not see the creepy man boarding. An hour later, we were up in the sky. Sometime through the flight, I got up to use the bathroom, and as I was finishing up in there, someone knocked on the door. I called out, "Occupied," but the person continued knocking repeatedly and aggressively. As I was washing my hands, I ignored it, hoping it would go away, but it didn't. So I opened the door to make some ballsy remark, but froze when I saw who was in front of me. It was that guy from the airport, still with that creepy grin plastered on his face. Quickly, I pushed past him and walked to my seat, not glancing behind me. The rest of my flight went normal except for the fact that I couldn't get him off my mind. As soon as we landed in Chicago, I was the first to get my suitcase down from the overhead luggage, and the first off of that airplane. I called an Uber as I walked to the airport parking lot. It was 12 p.m. in Chicago. The Uber came and I drove to my hotel, and as I checked into my room, I realized something horrible. My wallet was missing. I don't know where I could have left it, so I called the airport and asked them to search the plane. They did so and got back to me a few hours later saying they found nothing. I drove back to the airport and spent the whole rest of the day searching and turning up nothing. My only theories were I had somehow left it at San Francisco or it had been stolen. I was able to recover and spent 3 more days walletless in Chicago. But you know what? Here's the scary part. When I got back to San Francisco and drove to my house, I discovered something disturbing. My door was unlocked, and my entire house was trashed. Everything had been broken, and anything worth a slight amount of value had been taken. I checked my security footage and was able to identify the intruder as the grinning man from the airport who, sure enough, had my wallet and therefore my keys. I called the police, who found his fingerprints all over my house. The only scary thing was that the prints did not match anyone on record. The Creepy Stalker. On Saturday at 11:30 a.m., I invited my friend Sophia to come to my house, just a general hangout. She came to my house at 12:25 and everything was going normal when we was talking in my room. As we were hungry then, we decided to go out, so we bought some snacks and walked to the park, which is next to the shops. When we about to leave from the park and just walked across the road, I saw a white car. I thought it was passing by, but the car just slowed down next to me and one guy opened the window. He was almost 35 to 40-year-old Pakistani man. He asked me, "Are you okay?" with a perverted grin. Then he said to me, come here, I want to talk to you." And I said no, while looking at the back seat of the car to see if he has anyone with him that will harm us. But luckily, he didn't. The guy said, "Please, I want to talk to you." while he was licking his fingers and staring at me. Then he made such a nasty hand gesture. I felt very angry and disgusted. Sophia whispered to me, "Let's go, he's creep." As me and my friend walked away from the car and went to a different path, which is next to the shops, he followed us and parked next to me again. Then saying, "Why won't you speak to me? Come on, speak to me. Come here, please." Out of anger, I yelled and said, "Leave me alone, you weirdo." Then we saw him with a very evil and perverted smile. I grabbed Sophia's arm and ran inside the shop and hiding. I was calling my other friend Jahim and told him briefly what's going on. He kept saying, "Call the police," but I thought it would be alright. Few more minutes later, we left the shop and walked on the same path as that was the quickest way to go to my home. We thought everything was okay until she turned around and screamed, "He's following us!" There was the same white car. So scared. My legs were shaking as we ran, and while I was running, I told Jahim on the phone, "He's following us!" and then said, "Go to the spider park." It was a small park that no car can park as there was houses around and which was right next to my house. I shouted, "Sophia, hide!" She hid behind the wall while I was hiding another place. As a result, the guy was still following but couldn't find us. He was roaming around the area. When he disappeared, we went towards the park from a small gate and finally went back to my place. Once we arrived home, I told my family everything that happened and phoned the police, but the police didn't do anything about it. They just said, "We will use it as intel and update you, but we can't do anything right now," which made us feel so sad. However, the most scary thing came up next by Sophia, who reminded me suddenly about the incident I've told her a week ago. She said, "What if it is the same guy?" I said, "What do you mean?" Then she said, "You know, when you told me about the guy who knocked on your window while you was trying to sleep?" My mind froze. It was 3:00 a.m. in the morning. Luckily, I had curtains so he wouldn't see me, but I never forget the moment looking at the end of the curtain where the window was showing clearly and seeing a guy arm knocking on my window. I remember rubbing my eyes to make sure that I wasn't imaging some demons, but no matter how much I rubbed my eyes, the figure of the mysterious guy arm was still there. From that day on, I just stayed in my room feeling very scared for about 2 weeks. What if he was the same guy knocking on my window?
When I was 7, I had a really scary experience that I will never forget. I got up at 8 a.m., as usual, but as I stood up, I noticed something was different. It was very cold, and I felt like someone was watching me. When I turned to my sister's bed, she woke up, and I screamed. 2 heads hovered in the air, one of an older woman with long, dark hair and green eyes, the other of a bald, older man with blue eyes. I screamed again and ran to my mother. I told her what happened and saw some man at the door. I can't recall what he looked like, but I screamed and hugged my mother when I saw him. I was crying at this point, and she looked at me as I pointed to the door, not explaining why. She instantly knew what I was upset about, and she spoke in the direction of the door. I don't know what she said. I was just too scared to listen, and all I wanted was to be somewhere else. Nothing like this happened to me again, until I was 13. I was coming from my friend's house and was really tired. I went to my room, turned the lights off, and went to bed. At 4 a.m., I suddenly woke up without a reason. When I looked at the door, I saw my mother looking at my sister. She had lifeless eyes, which reminded me of the incident that happened when I was 7 years old. The heads had the same lifeless eyes as my mother. except her eyes were red and just looked evil. I knew it wasn't my mom. I hid under the blanket, praying that the thing would just go away. When I looked up, it was still there. I prayed again. Then it vanished. I mean, literally vanished. I saw it with my own eyes. That thing grew fainter and fainter until I couldn't see it anymore. When it was gone, I ran to my parents and explained what happened. They believed me and said that if I couldn't go to sleep, I could watch TV or just stay up. I thanked them and went to the living room. Now, I'm 14, and I talked to my mother about the incident that happened 7 years ago. And when I told her what the heads looked like, she seemed very surprised and confused. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me that the description I gave perfectly matched that of my dead grandparents. I don't know if they were really my grandparents, or who that man on the door was.
My name is Tade, and this incident happened to me when I was 8 years old. As I was in elementary school, we were learning about the Victorian era in history, which I didn't give a crap about. My history teacher had a Victorian family tree and stuck it on the walls of the classroom. I didn't know why we had to look into somebody's family history. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. When I laughed at it, the history teacher glared at me in the most stern and terrifying way. His veins were poking out of his head, and his hand clenched into a fist and was shaking quiveringly. "What are you laughing at, boy?" he yelled. It was weird. I was too scared to reply, so I said, "Nothing." Later that night, when I went to bed, I struggled to get to sleep. I was tossing and turning. A few minutes later, I finally drifted off to sleep, but it didn't last a long time. I woke up an hour later. I was checking my phone to see that it had just passed midnight. Suddenly, I heard a group of people talking outside. I thought it was one of the neighbors, so I headed to my window. When I looked to see what was going on, my heart just dropped. There, in the middle of the garden, were parents who were beating their child with a wooden club. The parents and the kid were all wearing the Victorian era style clothes. I was so confused why they were here, why they are beating their child, and why they wore such clothes out of place. Then, all of a sudden, the mother looked up at me. Her eyes glowed red, and she cackled loudly, which made me so terrified. Then she pointed at the sky with a finger that was so skinny, and the family faded away. I couldn't sleep at all the whole night, and I thought about the class that I took at school. From that day, I never made fun of any teachers again.
Hi, my name is Shay. Well, at least that's what everyone calls me. About 11 years ago, my mom, my big brother, and I moved from Mississippi to Nashville, Tennessee. We were staying with my uncle and his wife and stepkids for a while until we got our own place. About a month later, we found an apartment to stay in. I had a bunch of teddy bears that I really liked between I was 12 going on 13. Well, when we finished to move our new house, I decorated my room really nice, and I set my teddy bears on my shelf above my bed. A week later, I noticed one of my teddy bears would always go missing, and I would find it under my brother's bed. I thought he was taking my teddy bear just to freak me out, but he really had no idea what I was talking about. It was kind of weird, so I decided to lock all my bears in my closet. They stayed in my closet for 2 days. Everything was fine. That's what I thought until the third day after has been started. The third day, I woke up on a Saturday and my closet door was cracked and my teddy bear was in the same place under my brother's bed. I knew something was wrong. After that, I immediately threw my teddy bears away after that. We stayed in that apartment for a year. After that, we moved. I'll never forget the day of the move. We found bones in the fireplace from a human. Now I'm 23, and I still remember that day, but I always think, what if I set up a video camera to see what was causing my teddy bears to do what they did?
My name is Sam. It was August of 2001. I was 15 and accompanying my dad to visit his friend's new house. My dad's friend, who we call Rick, just moved into this house a few weeks ago. My dad wanted to visit and ask about renovation and decorating the place, as it was pretty old. Well, I'm English, so that means my country is full of old houses, from like the 1500s. Rick had bought an antique castle thing in a forest. I know, pretty creepy, right? Anyway, we arrived and Rick and his wife invited us in. My dad and Rick soon went off to the garage to discuss what plans were for that room. I was left alone with Georgina, Rick's wife, and their newborn baby, Rick Jr. Georgina asked me to fetch some formula from the kitchen for little Ricky. Being the good 15-year-old boy, I agreed, even if the house was home to demons. I went into the kitchen and the first thing I noticed was a trap door in the corner. Me, being curious, I opened it. A terrible smell filled the kitchen. It smelled like horse manure mixed with puke. Suddenly, a pale hand with long fingers grabbed me. I swore and started hitting the hand. Another hand grabbed my other hand and tried to drag me down. I shouted for my dad. Suddenly, purple eyes appeared from the darkness of the trap door. They stared at me. My dad rushed in, and the hands disappeared. I had scratches on my arm, and so I ran them under some cold water. My dad asked me what had happened. I said there was some demon guy in the cellar. My dad and Rick grabbed flashlights and searched the basement. Nothing was there. We called the cops who searched the property, and of course, they found nothing. When I got home, I went straight to my computer. It turns out a man was shot in a hunting accident there, roughly around 1770. But trust me, those hands weren't of a man. Rick still lives there, and over the past 18 years, there have been countless sightings and weird stuff. I just hope whoever or whatever that thing is goes away. It happened just a few years ago. When I was hanging out at my cousin's apartment, there was a building in front of the living room window. That night, we were having so much fun and having a fun conversation. It was 7 p.m. and we noticed that there was an open curtain in the building just a few feet across from our apartment. I got up in my seat just to take a quick look at that window. I was just curious. Then I saw a woman. At first, I couldn't see her face because her hair was blocking it. Then I told this to my cousin. He was shocked about what I said. He told me to get his binoculars. Then he used them to look. Suddenly, he screamed in fear. I asked him why. He said, "What the heck is that?" Then I got the binoculars and then I looked. My heart was pounding so hard. I saw a dead woman. Her neck was bleeding. Her blood was dripping on her yellow dress and her body was hanging from the small chandelier. My cousin has military experience, and he got up the courage to go into that room. Before we went into that room, we told the guard what was there. So we had 2 guards following us, and I told the one guard to follow me to our room so he could see what was in that window, and he was shocked too. He was shocked. He radioed to his fellow guard that was with my cousin, and then we followed them to the next building. We also called the cops. When the police arrived, we struggled opening the door. When we got there, we all turned on the lights, and everything in there was all messed up. We opened the bedroom, and we saw the dead body hanging from the chandelier. 2 weeks later, the murderer was caught, and the police gave us a reward for helping to solve a case. However, to this day, I will always remember the horror we experienced. It's a scary paranormal story that happened to me in my sophomore year in college. It still gives me creeps and scares me to this day. It's a true story. Trust me. As New Year has just begun, I moved into the apartment. It's a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 bathrooms. Me and my housemate got our own rooms. Everything seemed nice and got along great for the first week. I would often wake up to sounds in the middle of the night coming from the kitchen, since my room was the closest to it. I always assumed it was my roommate having a late night snack. After the second week, he told me that he was actually going to drop the university because he didn't feel so well physically and was kind of homesick. I was sad that he had to go, but I was a little excited thinking that I had the apartment to myself and wouldn't hear his midnight munchies. And that night, I woke up to noise from the kitchen again. I was a bit confused because I was the only one in the apartment. I was alone now. I then went to investigate and found a knife on the floor in the kitchen. I put it back in the drawer and went back to bed, thinking it might have fallen from the counter. A few nights passed and I didn't hear a sound, except for this night. I heard some sounds coming from my closet. It was about 3 a.m., and then I just felt a coldness around me, and my hair was standing up on my whole body when I woke up to see my closet. Suddenly, I saw a dark figure standing next to the closet. It looked like a Dementor from the Harry Potter movies, but it disappeared in a few seconds. I figured I was having a wild imagination. The next day, I felt tired from all my classes, so when nighttime fell, I knocked out in my bed. That night was the night I would never forget. I remember waking up to some noise coming from behind me. I woke up and I realized that I couldn't move. All I could move were my eyes. I was laying in bed in fear. My heart started to thump really hard. I felt a cold air behind me as I felt this person coming closer, but I couldn't hear any footsteps. That's when I realized the bed was shaking viciously, but it wasn't because of me. I tried to see at the corner of the room and I saw the dark figure from the other day. This time it had red eyes, like those of the devil. My heart sank when I saw it. Although I wasn't a strong believer in God until that moment, I closed my eyes and started to pray to God to help me. I started to remember my parents and friends. That's when I felt the figure stop. I just kept thinking of everything that made me happy and praying to God to help me. And finally, I felt the dark figure leave the room, retreating back to its corner. After 5 minutes, I was able to move my body. I decided to go sleep at my neighbor's apartment for the night as I ran away as fast as I could run. I eventually moved out of that apartment by the end of the month. And now I'm always wondering if those things are what made my housemate leave. Needless to say, I'm glad I moved out.
So I'm a nurse, and I was driving home from work one night. The roads were deserted, and it was freezing that night. I don't live far from work, maybe a couple of miles. I'm driving down a residential street around the corner from my house, and I see a man laying face down in the street. Once again, I'm a nurse, so my first thought was great. Gotta help this guy. I was coming off of a long shift, and falls happen all the time. As I slowed down the car, I suddenly realized what an idiot move it was. I'm a 100-pound woman and I don't carry a weapon. I thought I should do something to help this guy, so I called 911 as I drove past him and slowed to a stop at the end of the block. While I was stopped at the light, I explained to the dispatcher that there was a man in the road who might need assistance. All of a sudden, I hear a loud bang, bang from the driver's side window. I screamed and I looked over. A man was pounding on my window and jiggling the handle of my locked door. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that there was no man laying in the street anymore. Still on the phone with 911, I screamed, "I'm so scared," to the dispatcher and floored it through the red light. I quickly told him what had happened, and even though I was right by my house, he told me to keep driving. After a few minutes, I had calmed down and he told me to loop back around. I pulled over down the road from my house and I stayed in the car. I didn't see the man anywhere, so I got off the phone with the dispatcher, who told me he was sending a police car to cruise the area. As I gather up my things, I do a final scan of the area, and I see the man. He is walking with two other men. I hunched way down in my car until they were further down the road, then bolted into my house. I don't know if he had ill intent, but it freaks me the hell out that he wasn't alone. Just always, always lock your doors.
This story happened when I was in the 9th grade. I was going home after being at my friend's apartment. He's one of my good friends, so I often visited him. It was about 9 p.m. at night. Usually I went home at 5 or 6 when I visited him, but it was final exam week, so I went home later than usual to prepare for it together. He lives on the 15th floor. I took the freight elevator down because it was quicker than the passenger elevator. The elevator is kind of old, shaky, and not really well maintained. The fan isn't working, the walls are rusty, full of graffiti, and the light flickers, as you would expect from an old building's elevator. At the moment, there were 3 or 4 people with me going down to the lobby. The elevator went down normally. Then, suddenly, at the 9th floor, the door opened. I saw one of my other friends. Her name is Billy. She was playing, laughing with some kids who I assumed to be her friends. Then she looked at me and smiled. I stared at her for a moment, but I didn't reply to her because, well, we're not that close. Nothing came to mind to say. So the elevator closed back up and took me to the lobby. But soon, I realized that no one that was on the elevator with me seemed to notice those kids, despite the loud laughter they made. But once again, I didn't care about it, so I went back home and rested. The day after, I saw Billy again. Out of curiosity, I asked her, "Hey, why were you playing so late at night? Why didn't you stay at home?" She looked confused, as if I was asking her a random question. She then asked me, "Well, what do you mean? I didn't go anywhere yesterday. I was at my house." I was a bit confused, and I couldn't believe what she just said. She then asked me again, "Well, what was I wearing yesterday?" I answered, "You wore a white t-shirt, right?" I was hoping that she would say yes, but she said no. I felt my heart dropping. If it wasn't her that I saw last night, then who? A few days later, as usual, I was visiting my friend and went home late again. I waved goodbye to him as I was walking the corridor. One thing came to mind. How am I going to get down? Remembering those elevator things, I took the stairs. Well, I guess it wasn't a really good decision, but at least better than that scary elevator. I walked down the dark stairwell. Once in a while, I looked at the open part, and this time, I saw a shadow figure looking out from the balcony across. It seemed normal to me, probably a person looking down, so I kept on walking. Watching my step, I looked back up again, and suddenly, the shadow figure thing disappeared into nowhere in just a blink of an eye. I was so scared thinking about how the hell did that guy disappear that quickly? By jumping down the balcony? My steps went quicker, but to my astonishment, I saw the sign 8th floor, which means I saw that figure when I was on the 9th floor. That same floor that I witnessed the ghost Billy. Soon I called my friend and told him about it. He was surprised and told me that a lot of people also said that the 9th floor is actually haunted. There was once a guy that died there, but was found rotting in his apartment room 3 days later.
Hi, I live in a city of Philippine. This incident happened to me a while ago, but it reminded me forever and ever. That day, I was staying outside for some schedule, and it was kind of late, so I thought that I have no choice but to take a jeepney, which is a public vehicle in the Philippines, to ride back home. The street was pretty quiet, as I saw one jeepney was going to pass through, so I waved my hand. And when I just entered a jeepney, my eye directly reached a woman besides the driver's seat. The woman looked asleep beside the driver, and for her head is resting at his shoulders, so I thought that woman was a girlfriend of the driver. I sat to behind side, and in my front view of my seat, there was an old man, so there were only 4 passengers during that time. The inside of jeepney was quiet. Nobody was talking, and I didn't any pay attention to others. And that was the most worst things happened. When the jeepney have traveled for a few meters more, then the old man who was in front of me suddenly asked the driver to stop the vehicle and dragged me outside. At the first time, I didn't recognize what was going on. Then I was just scared of his sudden behavior, so I shouted, "Stop it!" He had no replies for a few seconds. Then he replied, "Shh, trust me." Still confused, but I quickly followed what he said because I'm very nervous that time and don't know what should I do. My mind was almost blew up. I kept thinking, what if he was going to steal something kill me? What should I do? When we already have left the jeepney, he stared me and finally told me with calm voice that the girl who was beside the driver's seat was already dead. I could not believe what was he saying. Then he said again, I saw with my own eyes. Her lips and nails were already black, and her waist have an ice pick stabbed on it and full of blood. I was shocked. If I didn't follow that old man so I didn't get off, what would be the next? The old man left behind me and said again, "You should be careful next time." After that day, when I get on jeepney, I always pay attention abnormally.
Two weeks ago, I woke up in the morning to get ready for school, as usual. Because I live in a small village, there's no bus that drives to my school, so I always have to drive with my bike about 4 miles. As I didn't want to drive alone, a friend of mine would drive with me to school every day. One morning, me and my friend would meet up at our place. Driving to the place, I wasn't feeling well, and my friend was waiting when I got to the place. We drove along through the woods and made some jokes about what was going to happen at school today. As we were driving, I heard some sticks cracking, and I thought nothing about it. Seconds later, I heard it again, and again, and again, and again. I asked my friend if he heard that too. He said, "No, why?" 1 minute later, I heard it again, but louder. I asked my friend, "Did you hear that?" But he said no. And the second after that, I saw a tall-like figure running just on the right of me. My heart got frozen. I screamed in my head as I saw that face. Everything was in the wrong place. The nose was above the eyes. The mouth was wide open, and the eye sockets were empty. I instantly passed out. 1 hour later, I woke up in a hospital with my friend sitting to the right of me and my mom to the left. My friend said that I fainted and fell to the ground and I had broken my left leg. The day after that, I laid in my bed with pain because of the broken leg. I had to take strong painkillers. Later that day, I laid in my bed and tried to sleep. As I was slowly passing out, I heard scratching on my window. I looked, and then I saw the face of the figure. I froze instantly. The figure was just scratching with its long fingers on the window. and smiled with a wide mouth. I blacked out again. I woke up in the morning with pain in my leg. I rolled to my left and took my painkillers. After that night, I never saw or heard anything of that figure again. I told my friend everything, and surprisingly, he said that he saw something like that in one of his dreams. I still don't know what that figure was and why my friend had a dream about that thing. I put down my blinds and shut my window at night. Always. Now we have a bus that brings us to school. I didn't tell my mom about this, and never will.
A few years ago, I took my family up to the cabins by the lake because I just won a big case against some drug dealer. In the middle of the night, my wife woke me up shaking my shoulder pretty hard. She told me that someone was banging on our door. I thought to myself, why would someone come to our cabin in the middle of the night? I got up to go check the door and my wife tried to hand me my bat, but I told her I wouldn't need it. The person kept knocking and I opened the door. It was a kid standing there. I asked him, "What are you doing here?" Then he started running. So I chased after him as my wife watched. He kept running in circles, then he tripped and I grabbed him and asked him, "Why are you knocking at our door in the middle of the night?" The boy said, "'Cause my uncles told me to." I asked, "What? Why?" The boy hesitated and looked me straight in my eyes and said, "To get you out of the house." Simultaneously, I hear my wife scream out my name in horror, and I hear footsteps running right behind me. I turn around and I see 4 hooded men running toward me. I reacted so quick that I ran over the kid. I see my wife and she ran off the porch ready to swing the bat, but I yelled at her to get back inside and called the cops. The guys were chasing me and were about 15 feet behind me. I made it inside the cabin, grabbed my cell phone and I called the cops. When the police officers arrived, they noticed that those guys went through our car and stole some of my information. Who were those guys? And what would have happened if they would have caught me? I know the situation could have been worse. They could have went inside the cabin with my kids and my wife, but what did they want with me? After that night, we never went back to that cabin.